Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive where we're going to get into something that on the surface might seem a little predictable. Influencer apologies.
Yeah.
You heard that right, but stick with us on this one because we're going to get, I think, a lot more interesting than you might expect.
What I think is interesting about this topic is that it's not just about the apologies. It's more about what they reveal, about how we relate to people online these days, and the culture that's built up around it.
Yeah, exactly. And to really unpack this whole thing, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Jake Doolittle, a YouTuber who has been making headlines lately, but not always for the best reasons. We've got a bunch of sources that we're going to be looking at today, some YouTube videos, some transcripts, some other creators talking about it, all dissecting his latest apology video and kind of all the drama surrounding it. And for those of you who might not be super deep in the YouTube world, Jake Doolittle, he makes comedic vlogs and commentary videos, but he's also kind of known for stirring up a bit of controversy, shall we say.
Yeah, his latest apology video is a perfect example of what we call the influencer apology economy. It's basically a system where apologies aren't really simple statements anymore. They're more like really carefully crafted performances trying to manage an image and keep an audience.
And audiences are getting more savvy to this whole thing, too. There's even this thing called the YouTuber Bad Apology bingo card that people use to analyze these videos. It's hilarious, but it's also kind of sad at the same time. It lists all the cliches and the insincere tactics influencers use, like a lack of accountability or deflecting blame or playing the victim. It's like they're all following the same script or something.
It's almost like viewers are playing a game waiting to see which boxes get ticked off right. And if there are too many hits on the bingo card, well, then the apology kind of backfires in a spectacular way.
Right. And that brings us back to Jake Doolittle. He's had quite a few controversies over the years. I mean,
Yeah.
We're talking accusations of blackmail, feuds with other YouTubers like Ethan Klein, and this general vibe of entitlement that just rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
Yeah, these perceptions are often fueled by commentary channels and other YouTubers who break down his every move, so it creates this feedback loop of judgment.
It's like everyone's a critic these days.
Yeah.
And influencers are constantly under the microscope. So how does Doolittle's latest apology really stack up against all this scrutiny?
Well, to really understand the impact of what he's saying, we need to talk about this concept of parasocial relationships.
Right. A parasocial relationship is basically this bond that we form with a media figure, even though it's one-sided. So we invest time and energy into these online personalities, even though they don't actually know us at all personally. So when they mess up, it can feel like kind of a betrayal.
Wow, parasocial relationships, that's kind of a mouthful. I've definitely felt that connection with certain YouTubers, but I've never really thought about it in those terms before. Can you break that down for us a bit more? Like, why should we care about this concept? Well, think about it this way. You spend hours watching someone's videos. You know, you feel like you kind of know them, you get invested in their lives, and then they do something wrong. And it can trigger a very real emotional response. And because of that bond, their apologies feel really personal, even though they're, broadcasting this to millions of people.
It's kind of like finding out that your favorite character in a TV show has done something terrible in real life. And that sense of betrayal can be really intense.
Exactly. And that intensity is really what drives this whole influencer apology economy. These apologies are super high stakes because influencers know that their livelihood depends on keeping that bond with their audience.
So with that in mind, let's actually get into Doolittle's apology video. I have to admit, I was pretty curious to see how he was going to address all this. It starts with him in the hospital blaming pain meds for his, previous outburst, and then things get a bit kind of murky from there. He shifts justifications quite a bit and mentions his nonprofit Never Stop a lot. It's almost like he's trying to use it as a shield or something.
And that's exactly what a lot of viewers picked up on. The inconsistencies, the self-justification, the way he uses his illness and the nonprofit to deflect any criticism. It just felt calculated and kind of inauthentic.
Yeah. One specific example that stood out was his rant about other YouTubers not donating to Never Stop. He's claiming that no one has ever offered support, even though he sent them merch and tried to drum up attention for it.
And yet we see in other sources where he's constantly pestering the H3 podcast for attention and collaborations.
He even calls AB, a producer from H3, his pal after doing just one collaboration and tries to leverage that connection for more exposure. It raises a really interesting question for all of us. Where do we draw the line between being a fan and crossing boundaries online?
It's a tricky balance, right? Especially when it comes to these parasocial relationships where influencers often encourage the sense of familiarity and closeness with their audience. Doolittle seems to kind of blur the lines between genuine friendship and just opportunistic networking.
It's almost as if he can't separate the online persona from the real person and genuinely believes that his online interactions entitle him to certain things in real life.
And that blurring of lines can have some pretty serious consequences, especially when it comes to expectations and entitlement. It just feeds into that perception of insincerity, which ultimately undermines how effective his apology actually is.
And this is where it gets really fascinating to me. We're seeing how all of these things, these parasocial relationships, the influencer apology economy, the pressure to maintain a certain image online, it all collides in this one situation.
It's like a perfect storm of online dynamics playing out right in front of us. And it's definitely a story that's far from over.
Definitely. We still got a lot to unpack here, so stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to delve even deeper into the specifics of all this Doolittle drama and what it reveals about this constantly evolving landscape of influencer apologies.
Welcome back to our deep dive into this whole influencer apology economy.
We're picking up right where we left off, exploring this fascinating case of Jake Doolittle, and I think his struggles to navigate this whole online world can really help us understand how apologies work or don't work these days in the age of social media.
And remember, we're not just focusing on the drama itself, but we're using it as a lens to examine these broader trends and what they tell us about our own relationship with these online personalities.
Exactly. We're all a part of this, whether we realize it or not.
Right.
So let's rewind a bit to a specific detail from Doolittle's apology video. His claim that no other YouTuber has ever donated to his nonprofit Never Stop.
And this is where the receipts come in handy. Several sources, including the H3 podcast and various commentary channels, highlighted a pretty awkward moment from a few years back that kind of directly contradicts this.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the time he called into the H3 podcast, right? And Ethan Klein kind of jokingly offered him $500.
That's the one. It was after the D'Amelio family allegedly stiffed him on this photography gig.
I vaguely remember that. Didn't he actually turn down the money, though?
He did. He asked Ethan to look at his resume instead. It was like he was more interested in a job or a platform from H3 than accepting, pretty generous offer of support.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like a missed opportunity, especially if he was genuinely struggling financially.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Apparently, Doolittle went on this whole campaign to try to get H3's attention, sliding into DMs, leaving comments, even name-dropping AB, the producer, that he did that one collab with as his pal.
What, that was just one single collaboration, right?
Yep. It seems like he was really trying to leverage that brief interaction into something much bigger.
It's almost like he felt entitled to a job or a platform just because of this one online interaction with them.
Exactly. And that behavior really shows what can go wrong with these parasocial relationships. It's almost like he couldn't separate that online persona from the real person and felt that this online connection with AB meant that they were friends in real life.
That blurring of lines is what I find so fascinating about all this, but also a little bit unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah, it definitely brings up some important questions about boundaries and expectations, both for influencers and for their audiences.
For sure. So how does this all tie back to Doolittle's current drama, the one that actually prompted this whole apology video in the first place?
Well, it all started when he released a video criticizing Ethan Klein for supposedly faking a health scare for clout. The irony here is pretty palpable, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially considering Doolittle's own tendency to leverage his health issues for sympathy.
Exactly. In the video, he fixates on Ethan's pronouncements about maybe having lupus, claiming it was all an act to get donations.
Which, as many sources have pointed out, is a pretty ridiculous claim, considering Ethan is already a successful YouTuber with multiple revenue streams.
Right. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And Doolittle's critiques really rely on nitpicking Ethan's word choices and misinterpreting medical information.
Sounds about right.
He even accuses Ethan of using ChatGPT to self-diagnose when it's clear that Doolittle himself is relying on Google searches for his own, medical expertise.
Giving hypocrisy for sure.
And again, we're seeing that lack of self-awareness and that tendency to project his own insecurities onto others.
What I find really interesting is that this whole controversy unfolded when Doolittle was actually experiencing real health issues himself.
He was in and out of the hospital, struggling with insurance, dealing with chronic pain, very real and difficult things to go through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet, instead of acknowledging how those stressors might have influenced his behavior, he doubles down on the accusations against Ethan and uses his own health as a shield from any criticism.
That's one of the classic pitfalls of this influencer apology economy, deflecting blame and refusing to actually take responsibility.
Right.
It's almost as if he's trying to play the victim, even though he's the one who started the whole conflict.
Yeah, it's a classic case of do as I say, not as I do, which really just erodes any sense of authenticity.
It all comes down to actions speak louder than words. Apologies are only effective if they're actually followed by genuine change. And in this case, a lot of viewers are left feeling like his actions don't really align with his words.
Which brings us back to Paige Christie's comparison. comparison with Jenna Marbles. She self-canceled, and while it wasn't necessarily a perfect solution, it felt decisive. She removed herself from the equation, and that in itself was a form of accountability.
It was a definitive action as opposed to just a carefully worded statement.
Yeah.
And that's what resonates with a lot of people. The sense that she was taking ownership of her mistakes and actually stepping back to reflect.
Makes you wonder, is there a future where self-cancellation becomes the norm?
That's a really thought-provoking question. Is it possible that the traditional influencer apology with all of its performative aspects is becoming obsolete?
Maybe audiences are just craving something more than words. Maybe they're looking for tangible evidence of change, a willingness to step back and reassess a genuine commitment to doing better.
It's definitely something to consider. And as we move into the final part of this deep dive, we'll explore those questions a bit further. We'll look at the strategies behind these influencer apologies, the motivations behind them, and the consequences of getting it wrong.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the influencer apology economy.
We've been dissecting this whole world through the lens of Jake Doolittle and his recent drama, but we've also touched on some much bigger questions about parasocial relationships and authenticity and this constantly evolving dynamic between influencers and their audiences.
And in this final part, we kind of want to zoom out even further and look at the apology video itself as like this cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, it's become a genre unto itself, right? It's got its own tropes and strategies.
Oh yeah, for sure. You've got the carefully crafted thumbnail, the somber lighting, the shaky voice. That's all part of the performance.
And audiences are getting more and more attuned to those performative aspects. We can spot a fake apology a mile away.
Which is probably why influencers are constantly trying to up their game. To find new ways to convince us that they're actually being sincere.
Yeah, one tactic we see a lot is what we might call the vulnerability play, where influencers share really personal information, often about their mental health or some kind of traumatic experience, in an attempt to get sympathy and deflect criticism.
It's like they're saying, look how much I'm suffering. Can't you just forgive me already?
Right. And while it's definitely important to acknowledge that these influencers are human beings with, real emotions and real struggles, it's also super important to be able to recognize when that vulnerability is being used as a weapon.
It's a slippery slope, for sure. On the one hand, we want them to be honest and open about their experiences. But on the other hand, we don't want them to exploit those vulnerabilities just for personal gain. Makes you wonder where the line is.
That's where critical thinking comes in. We as viewers really need to be able to tell the difference between a genuine expression of remorse and a calculated attempt to manipulate our emotions.
Do you think all this constant scrutiny of influencer apologies is actually making things worse? I know YouTuber Paige Christie kind of brought that up in one of the sources.
It's an interesting argument. It's like we're creating the self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we analyze and critique these apologies, the more pressure there is on these influencers to perform, to craft the perfect apology, the one that checks all the boxes.
And that, in turn, makes the apologies feel less authentic, less genuine. It's like they're trying too hard.
It's a total catch-22.
Yep.
So what's the solution? Do we just give up on influencer apologies altogether?
I don't think it's that simple. Apologies, even the ones that aren't perfect, can serve a purpose. They can be a starting point for dialogue, for accountability, for growth.
I agree. But I think the key is shifting our focus a bit. Instead of obsessing over the apology itself, maybe we should be paying more attention to what happens after the apology.
That's a really good point. It's so easy to get caught up in the drama of the moment, but the real test is whether they actually change their behavior.
Exactly. Do they follow through on their promises? Do they take steps to repair the harm that they've caused? Do they demonstrate a real commitment to doing better?
Actions speak louder than words, especially in the digital age. It's not enough to just say you're sorry. You have to actually show it.
And that's a message that we need to be sending to influencers. We're not just looking for a performance. We're looking for actual change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what is like the one key takeaway that you hope our listeners walk away with?
I think for me, it's that this influencer apology economy, it's really just a reflection of our own values and expectations. It's up to us as viewers to decide what we're willing to tolerate and what we demand from the people that we choose to follow online.
It's a good reminder that we actually have power in all this. We can choose to reward authenticity and integrity, or we can keep fueling this cycle of drama and these empty apologies.
It's a choice that we make with every click, every comment, every subscription.
We hope this deep dive has given you something to think about. What resonated with you the most? Have you ever had to kind of reevaluate your relationship with an influencer based on how they handled some sort of controversy? We would love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay curious and remember, critical thinking is the most valuable tool you have when it comes to navigating this complex world of online influence.
See you in the next deep dive.